Good day, welcome to the Great White North. Whether you've already jumped on the gimbal bandwagon or you're waiting for your couch cushion savings funds to acquire more than nachos and nibs before plunking down those hard-earned toonies on a 3-axis marvel, don't be overly confident in this technological terror. The ability to create smooth footage while walking is insignificant next to the power of a slider. You wouldn't use a drill to sink a nail. And although you wouldn't want to use a hammer to sink a screw, in a pinch and with a bit of extra effort, the hammer could get the job done. In the same way, a slider is a perfect choice for many specific shots, but with a bit of extra effort, a gimbal could get the job done. Because of this, many video creators have decided a gimbal is the only tool they need. Throughout this video, I'm going to show you how these two tools can't replace one another by highlighting a few key differences, with a subtle bias towards the slider. If you've had the opportunity to use a 3-axis gimbal, you'll know firsthand how challenging it can be to recreate specific camera movements more than once. Gimbals are totally reliant on your input for movement, and regardless how proficient and practiced you may be, it is ultimately you and your body movements that greatly limit the precision and accuracy of a gimbal. Speaking of body movements, after a lifetime of leg days, my body has been trained to run, and that's about it. Subsequently, I can't hold this gimbal forever, and after a few hours, my spaghetti arms are jello. In contrast, you don't need a gym membership to push a camera system of potentially any weight along a slider. Now, there are certainly gimbal support systems like the ReadyRig, and those help reduce the load of the gimbal and the camera on your arms. However, they do restrict the gimbal movement, at which point you really have to question if a gimbal is the right tool for the job. You'll likely need more than one person to maximize a gimbal's potential. You'll need at least one person to hold or wear the gimbal, likely a second to wirelessly pull focus, a third to adjust pan, tilt, and roll, and maybe a fourth person to ensure the entire choreographed dance doesn't bump into something while moving. Single-handed gimbals like the Ronin-S do make it a bit easier for solo operators, but they come with a few sacrifices. Gimbals often have very limited and narrow load capabilities. You'll need one gimbal for a cell phone, a different gimbal for a digital SLR, and an even bigger gimbal for large production cameras. This DJI Ronin-S maxes out at 3.6 kilos. Cameras heavier than that, and I need a bigger gimbal. Whereas a quality slider can support everything from a cell phone of only a few grams, all the way to a beastly Arri Alexa of many kilos. That's not an Arri Alexa, that's a 5D Mark II. Setup time for a gimbal is significant. There is extensive balancing required that seems to take hours. Once it's balanced, you need to calibrate it. And if you change lenses or add a hefty ND filter, you have to balance it and calibrate it once more. Most gimbals require a mobile device to calibrate it, to perform special functions, and to fine-tune all the settings. In contrast, set up your sticks, put your slider on your tripod, put your camera on your slider. That's the tricky part. As simple as that. Now you're off to the races. Gimbals are easily offended. That is to say, they're sensitive. You're unable to interact with your camera while the gimbal is in operation without introducing some serious shake to your footage. Yes, you might be able to gingerly tap the rear screen to adjust autofocus, but the overall lack of operability quickly increases the price associated with a gimbal. A wireless follow focus system and an off-camera screen are not inexpensive. The slider is much more forgiving and tolerates significant interaction without destroying a shot. I can pull focus, adjust the iris, even pan and tilt while using a fluid head. Where I feel a slider holds the most significant advantage over a gimbal is precision. As mentioned earlier, it's your body movements that greatly limit the precision of a gimbal. This is why gimbal shots typically utilize wide focal lengths with lens or in-camera image stabilization systems. These help hide the inaccuracies of an operator's movements. This lack of precision can reduce your efficiency when filming. If you're trying to repeat a shot with a gimbal, you will very rarely ever have the exact same framing. Additionally, the wider focal lengths typically used give every shot a very similar look and feel. They lack the diversity of the wide, medium, and tight. To better show you just how precise a slider is in comparison to a gimbal, I'm going to try and capture the exact same shot with both devices twice, starting with the gimbal. Side by side, the two shots of the gimbal don't look too different. However, if I overlay them and reduce the opacity, the mess reveals just how inaccurate a gimbal truly is. Now it's time for the slider. With the slider, things look a little different. The two shots side by side, they look very similar, and when overlaid with reduced opacity, it looks much better than the gimbal did. Keep in mind, I was only using the flywheel for the slider shots. If I had the motion control system set up, the two shots of the slider would be almost indistinguishable. Where the precision of the slider becomes most apparent is with longer focal lengths. So I'm going to try a 100mm on the gimbal and the 100mm on the slider and see how they look. With the longer 100mm focal length on the gimbal, these two shots are a mess. Side by side, it's very apparent they're not anything alike, and when overlaid with that reduced opacity, it is rather nauseating. So 100mm lens onto the slider. With the longer focal length on the slider, these two side-by-side shots are incredibly close. And if I reduce the opacity and stick them on top of each other, the differences are very, very slight. Also keep in mind, I was using the flywheel for these two shots. If I had used the motion control system, the differences in the two shots would be almost indistinguishable. I hope this shows you how precise and accurate a slider is when compared to a gimbal. To be fair, a gimbal is capable of producing shots a slider can't come close to matching. Gimbals are not restricted to a specific track length. They're not limited to a linear path. You can hand them off between multiple operators mid-shot. You can attach them to a jib. You can make them roll. It's a very long list. The slider that I've been using throughout this video is the Rhino Slider Evo, and it's a very impressive piece of kit that adds some great production value to any video. It feels very well constructed, and it will definitely endure a few accidental bumps throughout its lifetime, and in this case it already has. It's not exactly lightweight, but it's also not super heavy either. The rails are carbon fiber and they're quite manageable. The motion control system though is very beefy, and it does add some significant heft to the entire system. A more portable and less expensive option would be the flywheel, which works just as well. The entire system breaks down very nicely and fits perfectly inside a bag that Rhino will happily sell you. Setup time is very minimal, which is great if you're a solo operator. I chose this particular slider because of its adaptability and portability. I have used a number of Kessler crane sliders, like the Stealth, the Second Shooter, and a number of older styles, but most Kessler crane sliders are heavy, and they're not portable enough to meet my needs. I've also used the Cinematography Doozy 4, which is an amazing slider that produces very smooth footage, and best of all, it's made right here in the Great White North, but it's not expandable. I can't add a motorized motion control system to it. This Rhino Slider Evo, I can use it with a flywheel, without a flywheel, with one-axis motion control, with two-axis motion control, and it's lightweight enough that I can stick everything on my back and carry it up the side of a mountain. With the motion control system and the arc, this slider is a great option for making amazing parallax movements, which don't have to be limited to boring talking heads either. A parallax movement is when a subject remains relatively static in the frame, but the camera pans left and right while moving side to side, and this accentuates movement in the foreground and background. It looks rather stunning. You can create a parallax effect using a gimbal, and you can take it one step further by completing a full orbit. But you need to be operating the gimbal to do so. Whereas this slider, it can loop that parallax movement, meaning if you're a solo operator, you now have time to interact with your subject and maybe ask an insightful question. This slider doesn't necessarily need the motion control system to be worthy of a place on the side of your bag. Even with just your hand, motion is very smooth, but to make it even better, the flywheel. Add the flywheel and the momentum of accelerating and decelerating is dampened perfectly. I've mentioned it before when speaking specifically about gimbals, but it applies to sliders as well. Just because you have access to a slider or a gimbal doesn't mean every shot needs camera movement. Yes, camera movement is an easy way of increasing the perceived production value of your video, and it helps strengthen emotions very easily. But knowing when and how to use camera movement in your shots takes a lot of practice and experience. To wrap things up, I want to reiterate that both a gimbal and a slider are terrific options for adding dynamic camera movements to your video. Each excels at differing shots, and each delivers a very different look and feel than the other. Admittedly, I've been rather tough on gimbals throughout this video. They are very strong tools with immense potential, limited really by only what your mind can dream up. However, I don't believe a gimbal can outright replace a slider. These are very different tools, and they each have their own strengths and weaknesses. With that, I would like to thank you for watching. If you've liked this video, click like. If you have a question or a comment, put it down below, and I will see you next time.